Amid the crowd of 200 at Oakhaven Town Hall, Texas, 65-year-old Raymond Hayes stands quietly, watching four emerald green ABC News SUVs. He did not come for money. He only wants to see Chloe, Haley, and Paige, the three white girls he skipped meals to buy coats for 20 years ago. But now, Raymond is about to lose his family home, with only $430 left in his bank account. The trouble started when the girl's billionaire uncle used money to frame Raymond as a kidnapper to take custody. Raymond decided to fight for justice, despite unfair court rulings, a hateful town, and a giant financial power. Can an old, retired driver fight a whole system of prejudice when his three powerful daughters step out of the car? 3 days before that crowd gathered, Raymond woke up alone in a house that still smelled like coffee from 20 years back. The clock on his nightstand read 5:17 in the morning. His right knee throbbed first, deep and dull, an old injury from years behind the wheel of a school bus. Then came the ache in his left hip, a second alarm his body never let him snooze. He sat up slow. Cold air pushed through a crack in the window frame. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice, then stopped. Raymond shuffled to the kitchen in his socks. The linoleum floor felt gritty under his heels. His old refrigerator hummed like a tired engine that refused to quit. Inside, there was half a carton of milk and one dry slice of bread. He ate the bread plain. He did not have butter. He swallowed one pain pill with no water, wincing as it caught his throat. Then he sat down at his oak table, the same table his grandfather built by hand. The house smelled faintly of old cedar and last night's rain. A single light bulb buzzed above the sink, flickering every few seconds. Somewhere down the hall, a loose pipe knocked twice against the wall, an old sound Raymond had learned to sleep through years ago. He rubbed his palms together, feeling the rough calluses built from decades gripping a steering wheel through every kind of weather. 3 faded Polaroid photos sat under a chipped coffee mug. Chloe at 8 years old, Haley at 6, Paige, the youngest, barely 4, missing her front teeth. Raymond ran his thumb across Paige's photo. The paper felt soft, worn thin from years of touching. He remembered the day that photo was taken, in a backyard full of dandelions, all 3 girls laughing at once. Back then, the girls barely spoke. Years of moving between strangers' houses had taught them to stay quiet and small. It took Raymond almost a full year before Paige let him carry her up the stairs at bedtime. He pulled out a crumpled bank receipt from his shirt pocket. The number on it read $430. 25. His mortgage payment, due 12 days ago, was $710. 00. His chest tightened. He folded the receipt twice and pushed it back into his pocket. Every month felt tighter than the last. His pension check barely covered his medicine, let alone the mortgage. He had already sold his old truck 2 winters ago just to cover one late payment and stay afloat. Raymond never told anyone how close he had come to losing everything more than once before. Raymond was not a man who complained. He straightened his shoulders, stood up, and walked to check his mail, because that was what he always did at 9 o'clock in the morning. He barely made it to the porch before a black Ford Explorer rolled up outside his house. The truck had gold letters on the door, Oakhaven Community Bank. 2 men in dark jackets stepped out first. Then came Gregory Vance. Vance wore a crisp gray suit and thick gold-rimmed glasses that caught the morning sun. His shoes clicked hard against the pavement, sharp and deliberate. "Raymond Hayes," Vance said loudly, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You're 17 days past due. That's a shame for a man your age." He peeled a bright red foreclosure notice from a folder and slapped it onto Raymond's front door. The paper crinkled loudly against the wood, its red ink bright enough to catch every neighbor's eye. Raymond stared at the paper, without blinking, the words blurring together under the harsh morning sun. "Folks like you," Vance added, smirking, "shouldn't be living on land like this anyway." One of the men behind Vance chuckled quietly, glancing back at his phone instead of at Raymond. The smell of fresh cologne drifted off Vance's suit, sharp and out of place against the dusty porch air. Raymond's jaw locked tight. A vein pulsed once at his temple. He said nothing. His hands curled slowly at his sides, knuckles whitening, though he never once raised them. He knew one wrong word from a black man in this town could turn into handcuffs by noon. As the truck pulled away, Raymond's old transistor radio crackled to life on the porch railing. A local announcer's voice broke through static. Breaking news out of Oak Haven. Harrington Holdings will unveil a $150 million redevelopment project this Friday at Town Hall. The announcer kept talking. Leading the announcement will be 3 new executives, Chloe, Haley, and Paige Harrington. Raymond's knees nearly buckled. He gripped the porch railing until his knuckles turned pale white. The radio kept crackling, half drowned by static, but the names came through clear enough to steal his breath. Those were his girls, his daughters, grown now and somehow tied to the very family that tore them apart from him. For a moment, the porch, the foreclosure notice, even the ache in his knee, all seemed to disappear entirely. He would have 5 days left before the bank auctioned his house. And now, somehow, his daughters were coming home. Raymond stepped back inside and closed the door softly. The room felt darker than before. He pulled an old leather suitcase from the closet and began folding his shirts, slow and careful. He told himself he was nothing but a tired old man now, a retired driver on a $1 $450 monthly pension, not fit to stand near girls who now wore designer coats and rode in private cars. He remembered a night 20 years ago, cold enough to crack skin. He had taken a 3rd shift driving an ambulance through a snowstorm just to earn $120. The wind that night had howled against the ambulance windows, sharp enough to rattle the glass in its frame. His hands had gone numb on the steering wheel, but he kept driving, thinking only of Paige's ragged breathing at home. That money-bought asthma medicine for little Paige, who could barely breathe through her wheezing that winter. He remembered sitting by her bed until sunrise, listening to every breath, terrified each one might be her last. Back then, this whole town wanted to send 3 orphaned white girls to a state facility. They called them a burden. Only Raymond opened his door. The town council had even sent a caseworker to question his motives, suspicious that a black man wanted 3 white children. Raymond answered every question calmly, though the insults stung worse than any winter wind ever could. He was afraid of many things, but not hunger and not the cold. He was afraid his daughters would feel shame standing beside him now. A soft knock interrupted his packing. He opened the door to find Clara Jenkins, his 72-year-old neighbor, holding a dusty cardboard box. "Raymond," she said gently, "I think it's time you saw this." Inside the box were dozens of old letters tied together with string. Letters from Chloe, from Haley, from Paige, spanning 15 long years. Some envelopes were yellowed at the edges. Others still smelled faintly of perfume, as if sealed only yesterday. "The post office sat on these," Clara said, her voice shaking with quiet anger. "Someone with money made sure you never got them." Clara explained she found the box tucked behind old filing cabinets, right before the post office closed down for good last spring. She had recognized Raymond's name on the top envelope and knew immediately what she had stumbled onto. Raymond's hands trembled as he touched the yellowed envelopes. His eyes stung and his throat closed up tight. Clara reached in a box one more time. She pulled out a small wooden bracelet, carved crudely from pine. "Dad Raymond," it read, carved in a child's uneven handwriting. Chloe had made it herself when she was only 8. "They never forgot you," Clara whispered. "Don't let this town convince you that you were forgotten." Raymond held the bracelet against his chest. For the first time in years, something inside him refused to stay quiet. Clara placed a wrinkled hand over his. "You raised 3 good women, Raymond. Don't let this town erase that." He nodded slowly, unable to speak past the lump forming thick in his throat. Clara stayed a while longer, sipping weak coffee at his kitchen table, saying little else. Before she left, She squeezed his shoulder once. Friday morning. Wear the suit. Walking like you belong there. He looked at the suitcase on his bed, half packed with defeat. Then he closed it and pushed it into the closet instead. He had spent 20 years believing silence was strength. Maybe silence had only been fear wearing a different coat. That night, Raymond barely slept. He kept turning the wooden bracelet over in his fingers, feeling every rough groove Chloe had carved. By morning, Raymond had made his decision. He would not run from Friday. He would walk straight into it. He filled the bathtub and washed carefully, scrubbing years of dust from under his fingernails. Then he opened his old closet door. Inside hung a single navy blue suit, faded gray at the elbows. He had worn it once at Chloe's 5th grade graduation 18 years ago. He buttoned the jacket slowly. It still fit, though looser now around his once broad shoulders. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar from the closet, mixed with a trace of old cologne he barely remembered wearing. He studied himself in the cracked bathroom mirror, noting new gray hairs at his temples that had not been there before. Raymond straightened his collar and let out a slow breath, steadying the tremble building in his hands. At 9:45 that Friday morning, Raymond stepped outside his front door and into the dry Texas wind. He did not call a bus. He chose to walk the 2.5 miles to town hall himself. Every step down Sycamore Lane sent a sharp jolt through his bad knee. He did not slow down. Dust kicked up around his shoes with every stride, coating the cuffs of his old suit pants. Somewhere nearby, a lawnmower rattled to life, its engine sputtering, before settling into a steady drone. Around him, the poor side of town gave way slowly to wide streets and polished storefronts. Flags snapped loudly in the wind, announcing the coming celebration. The air itself seemed to change, thick with the smell of fresh paint and brewing coffee from expensive cafes. Raymond walked past shop windows reflecting his own tired face. For once, he did not look away from his reflection. He crossed an invisible line between two very different Oak Havens, one he had lived in for decades and one built entirely without him. Ahead, the crowd near Town Hall had already swelled past 1,000 people, buzzing with excitement over the new development deal. Raymond had no way of knowing what waited for him at those gates, but he kept walking anyway. Near the front barricades, Gregory Vance spotted Raymond's tall frame moving through the crowd. His lips curled into a thin, ugly smile. Vance snapped his fingers at 2 private security guards standing nearby. "Get that man away from the stage. Now." The guards moved fast, grabbing Raymond by both arms and shoving him backward into the crowd. "Sir, step back," one guard barked, his voice cold and mechanical. "This is a private event for investors only." Raymond stumbled, but caught his footing. His shoulder throbbed where the guard's grip had dug in. The smell of fried food from a nearby vendor cart mixed strangely with the sharp scent of fresh asphalt. Somewhere in the crowd, a child laughed loudly, unaware of the tension building near the barricade. A woman nearby whispered something to her husband, both staring at Raymond like he had wandered in from another world. Raymond kept his eyes forward, refusing to meet the stares now gathering around him like slow, curious flies. Raymond said nothing. He simply stood back up, straightened his jacket, and moved forward again through the crowd. 24-year-old Leo Carter, a young reporter from the town's small independent paper, noticed the commotion near the barricade. Leo lifted his camera and began filming, his lens locked steady on the security guards pushing an elderly man. The guards noticed the camera and eased their grip slightly. None of them wanted footage of themselves shoving an old man online. Leo zoomed in closer, capturing Raymond's calm face despite the rough treatment around him. He had covered small-town stories for 2 years, but something about this moment felt different, heavier somehow. Leo made a quiet decision right then to keep his camera rolling, no matter what happened next. Raymond's chest heaved from the shove, but his spine stayed straight. He would not give this crowd a scene. He thought only of his daughters, somewhere behind that stage, and how a struggle in the dirt would only shame them. By 10:30, the ceremony began. 3 green SUVs rolled to a stop right beside the town hall steps. Chloe stepped out first, her blonde hair catching the sunlight, dressed in a sharp tailored blazer. Haley followed close behind, holding a leather folder against her chest. Paige came last, adjusting her sunglasses calmly. The crowd erupted into applause at the sight of them, cameras flashing from every direction at once. None of the 3 sisters noticed the tall figure struggling near the security rope behind them. They smiled for the cameras, waving politely, unaware of what waited just beyond the barricade. Raymond pushed forward through the packed crowd, his heart hammering hard against his ribs. He was close now, maybe 15 meters from the stage, separated only by one more line of security rope. Gregory Vance leaned toward the town's police chief, whispering something sharp into his ear. Moments later, 2 officers began moving toward Raymond, their hands resting near their belts. Their boots crunched against loose gravel as they approached, slow and deliberate, like men who had done this before. "Sir, we need you to come with us," one officer said, his tone flat and final. Raymond raised both hands slowly, palms open, careful not to make a single sudden move. Raymond's mouth went dry. His pulse pounded, so loud he could barely hear the microphone crackling on stage. He looked past the officers, past the rope, and caught one brief glimpse of Paige laughing at something Chloe said. Then the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, cold metal biting into his skin. The crowd around him fell into an uneasy hush. Somewhere, a cooling fan on a nearby speaker buzzed faintly in the silence. Gregory Vance grabbed a handheld microphone from an aide and stepped closer, savoring every second of it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vance announced, his voice booming across the plaza, "this man is a known debtor. He's tried to attach himself to the Harrington name for a payday," Vance sneered, pointing directly at Raymond. 2 officers forced Raymond down onto his knees on the hot concrete. Heat seeped through his trousers instantly. The concrete burned through the thin fabric, sharp enough to make his breath catch in his chest. Somewhere close, an air conditioning unit outside Town Hall rattled steadily, indifferent to everything happening below it. As he knelt, the small wooden bracelet slipped from his jacket pocket and rolled across the ground. It spun once, then settled near Vance's polished shoe, small and pale against the gray concrete. Vance glanced down, recognized it as nothing but a child's trinket, and stepped forward without a second thought. His polished shoe came down hard, grinding the little wooden bracelet into broken pieces against the pavement. Raymond's eyes squeezed shut. A single tear cut a clean line down his sun-worn cheek. 20 years of memory, crushed under leather in front of 1,000 strangers. He did not cry out. He simply knelt there, breathing slow, waiting for whatever came next. High above on the stage, a massive LED screen displayed a live camera feed from the ABC News crew. Chloe glanced up at the screen out of habit, expecting to see herself smiling for the cameras. Instead, she saw a bracelet splintered under a stranger's shoe and a kneeling man with graying hair. Her stomach dropped. She knew that bracelet. She had carved it herself 20 years ago at her father's kitchen table. "Stop!" Chloe shouted, ripping the microphone straight out of the news anchor's hand. Haley turned toward the screen next, her breath catching hard in her throat when she recognized her father's face. Paige froze for only a second before her sunglasses hit the ground and she started running. All 3 sisters bolted from the stage, ignoring the startled security team trying to block their path. An aide reached out to grab Haley's arm, but she twisted free without breaking stride. Chloe's heels snapped off mid-stride, but she kept running barefoot across the hot pavement. The crowd parted in confused clusters, phones raised, cameras capturing 3 women sprinting past stunned reporters. The sisters shoved past 2 stunned officers and dropped to their knees beside their father in the dirt. "Dad," Paige sobbed, wrapping both arms around Raymond's shoulders. We're here now. Her voice cracked on the last word, thick with 20 years of unspoken longing. Chloe used the sleeve of her expensive blazer to wipe dust and tears from Raymond's face. Haley knelt beside them both, pressing her forehead gently against her father's shoulder without saying a word. For a moment, no one in that crowd moved. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Gregory Vance's confident smile began to crack at the edges, his fingers tightening around the microphone. These girls, Vance stammered into the mic, they don't understand. This man manipulated them for years. He raised his voice louder, desperate now. Your house auction happens at 4 o'clock today. Nothing changes that. If you side with this deadbeat, Vance threatened, I will personally cancel this entire $150 million deal. The crowd murmured uneasily, some faces turning toward the sisters, waiting to see what they would do. Raymond, still kneeling, looked up at his daughters with wet eyes. Go back up there, he whispered. Don't ruin this for yourselves. Chloe shook her head firmly and stood up, pulling Raymond gently to his feet beside her. She turned to face the cameras directly, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. You want to talk about law and money? Chloe said. Then listen very carefully. Haley opened her leather folder and pulled out a stamped legal document, the red seal still fresh. The paper crackled faintly as she unfolded it, holding it high enough for every camera to catch clearly. This morning, at 8 o'clock sharp, our holding company finalized a purchase, Haley announced. We now own 51% of Oak Haven Community Bank. She paid $14.8 million for that controlling stake, moving quietly through a subsidiary over the past 2 days. A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd. Gregory Vance's face drained of color instantly. His mouth opened and closed twice, but no words came out at all. Paige stepped toward Vance and yanked the employee badge straight off his chest with one sharp pull. You're terminated, effective immediately, Paige said flatly, for predatory lending against this town's black residents. Vance opened his mouth to argue, but no sound came out. His hands shook at his sides. Sweat beaded along his hairline, sliding slowly past his gold-rimmed glasses despite the cool morning air. He glanced toward the police chief for help, but the officer only looked away, saying nothing at all. Haley pulled one more document from her folder, holding it up high for the cameras to see. 20 years ago, our uncle Douglas Harrington paid to frame this man as a kidnapper, Haley said. It was a lie. Our uncle saw 3 orphan nieces as an embarrassment, not a family, she said, her voice steady but cold. He had paid a corrupt judge and 2 false witnesses to twist a loving father into a criminal overnight. Every court ruling against Raymond Hayes was built on falsified evidence, she continued. We have the proof right here. Paige added quietly. Our uncle passed away last spring. But the paper trail he left behind did not die with him. The crowd's murmurs turned into stunned silence, broken only by the faint hum of a nearby air conditioning unit. Chloe stepped forward one last time, her chin raised high and steady. Effective today, every dollar of my father's mortgage debt is forgiven, she announced. In full. She paused, letting the words settle over the crowd like slow rain after a long drought. We are also founding the Raymond Hayes Foundation, Chloe said, with $100 million to help single black fathers across Texas. This foundation will fund legal defense, housing grants, and medical care, Chloe continued, for families this system has failed. Paige stepped forward and added, no father should ever go hungry to keep his children warm. Not again. Haley nodded firmly beside her sisters, her eyes still red, but her voice steady and clear. For a long moment, all 200 people stood frozen, unsure how to react to what they had just witnessed. Then, from the back of the crowd, one pair of hands began clapping, slow and steady. More hands joined in, rippling forward through the plaza, until the applause became a roar. Many of the same people, who once whispered about Raymond, now lowered their eyes in quiet shame. An older man near the front removed his hat and pressed it against his chest, silent and still. A young mother nearby wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, gripping her son's shoulder tightly. Raymond stood between his three daughters, feeling something loosen in his chest for the first time in decades. The tightness that had lived behind his ribs for 20 years finally began, slowly, to unclench. He was no longer the lonely man who once walked Sycamore Lane with his head down. Clara Jenkins pushed through the crowd, tears streaming freely down her wrinkled cheeks, and hugged Raymond tightly. "I told you," she whispered into his ear. "They never forgot you." Raymond nodded, unable to speak, his throat too tight to form any words. Later that afternoon, the sisters walked their father back to his old wooden house on Sycamore Lane. They walked slowly this time, matching Raymond's tired pace instead of rushing ahead like they once had as children. Chloe held her father's arm gently, careful of his bad knee, while Paige carried his old suit jacket. Neighbors stepped out onto their porches as they passed, some waving, others simply watching in quiet disbelief. The same street that once felt lonely to Raymond now echoed, with soft laughter between four familiar voices. The house that almost sold at auction, that same day, now belonged to Raymond, free and clear forever. Haley had called the bank directly from her phone, canceling the auction, before their car even reached Sycamore Lane. Inside the kitchen, sunlight spilled across the same oak table his grandfather had built with his own hands. Paige ran her fingers along the table's worn edge, remembering breakfast here from 20 years ago. The refrigerator still hummed its tired, familiar hum, and for once, the sound felt almost comforting. Chloe knelt down and picked up two broken pieces of the wooden bracelet from Raymond's jacket pocket. She turned the splintered wood slowly in her palm, tracing the faint letter she had carved as a child. "I can fix this," she said softly, turning the splintered wood over in her fingers. Raymond shook his head slowly, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Leave it broken," he said. "It survived. That's enough for me." The four of them stood together in that small kitchen, arms wrapped around each other in a tight, warm circle. Outside, the Texas wind rattled softly against the old window panes, the same windows that once watched Raymond struggle alone. Now, those same windows watched something else entirely, a family, finally whole, standing exactly where they belonged. Every dollar Raymond had spent on coats and medicine 20 years ago had finally come home to him, not as money, but as three grown daughters who never once stopped loving the man who saved them. Outside, the wind picked up again, rustling the old oak tree that shaded the porch every summer. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's radio played, faintly, the same local station that once carried the news that changed everything. Raymond sat down at his grandfather's table, surrounded by his daughters, and let himself simply breathe for a while. No debts, no foreclosure notice taped to his door, no fear of being alone again. And in that quiet kitchen, with dust still settling outside on Sycamore Lane, Raymond Hayes finally understood. 20 years of silence, hunger, and unanswered letters had not been wasted after all. They had simply been waiting patiently for this exact moment to arrive. The wooden bracelet stayed broken, sitting on the windowsill above the sink, catching the afternoon light every day after. Raymond never fixed it. He never needed to. Some things mean more broken than whole, carrying every year of struggle inside every crack. Every evening after, the four of them gathered around that same oak table, sharing dinner and quiet laughter. The house on Sycamore Lane, once so silent, finally filled with the sound of a family made whole again. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid him now waved warmly whenever Raymond stepped outside. Clara visited most Sundays, bringing pie and stories, staying long past sunset each time. Raymond still woke early most mornings, out of habit more than pain now. He would sit at his oak table, watching sunlight spread slowly across the old wooden floor. Somewhere in that quiet house, 20 years of hardship finally settled into something close to peace.